This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, today we have a first on StoryBeat. I'm privileged to bring to you a second session with the one and only Phil Proctor. I'm not going to repeat Phil's entire biography because you can hear it in all its glory on the first session. Just know this, Phil has spent more than 60 years entertaining audiences the world over on stages, films, on radio, and especially as a founding member of the legendary comedy group the Firesign Theatre, whose records I wore out in my wayward youth. He's just published his new book, Where's My Fortune Cookie? My Psychic Psurrealistic Story, co-written with Brad Schreiber. Also, you can keep up with Phil's world by signing up to receive his monthly blog, Planet Proctor, at www.planetproctor.com. Well, I'm lucky, and we're all lucky beyond mere words, to welcome the amazing Phil Proctor back to StoryBeat for a second time. Phil, thanks for joining me again.
Oh, sure. Listen, great to be on the beat. However, I do have to correct something you said. You called me the one and only Phil Proctor, but in my life out here in California, I've met two other Phil Proctors.
Oh, my goodness.
And worked with them, in fact.
You've worked with two others?
There are two other Phil Proctors, yeah. The first job I did down at the Mark Taper Forum many years ago, in the 60s, about 67 or so, the publicist was a woman named Proctor, and her son was named Phil Proctor.
Wow.
And then later I met another Phil Proctor who's a stage manager out at Pepperdine University. See, so there's at least three of me walking around here in Southern California.
And
I don't know what's become of the other two, but maybe their books will be coming out soon.
And are they as funny as you?
Nobody is as funny as I am.
That is true.
No, but they were good listeners. Okay, they were good. They definitely had a sense of humor.
All right, so I'm curious. Things we didn't get into in the last session. In your book, the title of your book, "Where's My Fortune Cookie?" I know what that story is. I've read the book. Tell us where that story comes from.
Well, again, like everything in the book, it's very convoluted and intertwined. Have you ever seen those Celtic knots?
Yes.
You know, they've got rings with Celtic knots. That's kind of the way my life is. I'm Irish and Amish of ancestry, and both of those cultures are really kind of insular and ancient, okay, and have a history. And that's kind of where I come from. So the story of the title of the book came out of the fact that, first of all, that Peter Bergman and I were involved in a Chinese gangland shooting in San Francisco 40 years ago this past September, okay? And we survived. 5 people were killed and 11 were wounded. It was at a famous restaurant called the Golden Dragon in San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
And at the time it was the worst massacre in American history. Sadly, that record has been long surpassed over time,
mm-hmm.
and the recent event in Las Vegas,
indeed,
puts a period to that story. But anyway, after the shooting was over, and Peter and I determined that we survived, even though our friend had been wounded, Bill Alexander, and he still carries a machine gun slug behind his knee. We knew that we had to perform the next day at Boulder, Colorado.
Right.
And since this was a big story and everybody knew about it, the fact that we were involved in it was something we had to talk about. So at our performance the following evening, in Colorado, I came up with lines like, we were involved in this Chinese gangland shooting. You probably heard about it. But luckily, I ordered the duck, right? Ha, 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 ha. If we'd known that if we'd known, we're just lucky that we didn't order to go, okay? Jokes like that. And Bergman said that he was lucky because he ordered the scared prawns. The scared prawn. Typical, deep Bergman pun. And, of course, he said he never got his fortune cookie. But that's not where the title came from. Ironically, when Peter passed away 5 years ago of leukemia, we had a big brouhaha. We called it the Bergman's Big Brouhaha. It was a memorial service at the Electric Lodge in Venice, California.
Okay.
We also had an event for him up north in Washington State because he was living up on Whidbey Island for a while, and he had lots of friends and fans up there. So anyway, at this event, one of our supporters, a woman named Gretchen Steiner, had supplied us with fortune cookies.
Right.
Okay? And they had a picture of Peter a cartoon of Peter on the front that said Bergman's Big Brouhaha, wrapped in cellophane, and when you opened them up and opened the cookie up, there was, Peter Bergman, his date of birth, his date of death, and one of the titles of one of the Firesign Theatre albums. So I was very grateful, and after the event was over, I went to thank her. I said, it was so great of you to get those fortune cookies because of, the gangland shooting that we survived. And she said, what? I said, the Golden Dragon Massacre that Peter and I were involved in. She said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you don't know about this? Why did you supply fortune cookies? And this is what she said to me. She said, because Peter came to me in a dream and said, I never got my fortune cookies.
Well, there you go with the premonitions and the dreams. That's been pervasive throughout.
And this is compounded by the fact, as I think I stated when I talked to you before, that the entire event had been predicted to me by a former girlfriend of mine.
That's
named
amazing.
Sharon, whom I had visited with at least 3 months, maybe 2 or 3 months before the shooting happened. And she told me very specifically that she said, I don't like to say bad things like this that are going to happen to you, but you and Peter, after a performance, you're going to be involved in a shooting, and foreigners will be involved in the shooting,
Wow.
and people will be killed and wounded around you, but you and Peter will escape unscathed. That's what she told me. And I didn't even think about that until maybe a week after the event had happened, and I suddenly said, my God, she predicted the whole thing. And I got in touch with her and told her, and she said, yeah, well.
Did you ask her what the lottery numbers were going to be?
I should have. After that. But anyway, the important thing was that my number wasn't up.
Clearly not, and we're all very fortunate for it. So,
yes,
so in writing the book, let's talk about that. That's a writing approach. I know you wrote it with a collaborator, Brad Schreiber. What was that process like, and how does it differ from when you're writing sketch comedy?
Oh, it's really the difference between night and day, because what has happened in my life, which you'll see in the book, is that I'm kind of insanely busy all the time.
Yes.
And even when I'm not gainfully employed, when people aren't paying me money to be funny or to act or to make people cry on the stage or whatever, I still find myself involved in life and involved in creative endeavors. That's why I do Planet Proctor every month.
Of course.
I started doing that, 25 years ago, to keep my writing chops up.
Wow.
Because, Firesign wasn't writing as much on a regular basis because we weren't cranking out albums the way we used to. And so I had this backup of ideas that were driving me insane, right?
Right.
And so I started observing, making my own comments on what was happening in the world around me, politically and socially and internationally and all the rest of it. And over the years, the blog evolved into really a very beautiful monthly presentation, because I've been collaborating for maybe a decade now, with a fellow named Christopher Gross, who lives up in, well, it doesn't matter where he lives, but these days he can live on Mars. But I sent him the raw material, the basic, not the raw material, the outline, the text outline of the blog, and then he supplies artwork to it. I sent him pictures and things that illustrate it. And he puts together this really beautiful graphic, illustrated planet.
I've been reading it for years, Phil. It's absolutely gorgeous.
It's really fun, to look at, and I get good feedback from all the free subscribers, my Planeteers that I send it out to. And of course, if you're interested, you can go to the website as you suggested, planetproctor.com. Take a look, and if you're interested in receiving
Sign up.
It's a combination of jokes, although jokes are harder and harder to come by.
Oh boy.
You remember in the old days, people used to send jokes around with all those lines on the side indicating how many times it had been copied and sent, right?
Sure.
And so there was a constant kind of flow of funny that went on in the internet. And then over the years, that has become less and less. And one of the reasons is that the jokes show up on the public platforms, on the social media, right? And that's why I maintain a presence on Facebook, because I like to scroll around and visit my friends' sites and find out the stuff that they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, there'll be a funny story that I then will copy and throw into the mix, especially if it's a contemporary story or it has some kind of a political or social edge to it. But for the most part, my blog is about my own adventures and comments on the world around me and the things that are happening. And occasionally I'll drop in odd articles about things that have to do with science or marijuana or other issues that Firesign Theatre has been, interested in for 50 years.
Yeah, indeed.
The 50 years of our career. But in this instance, because of my active life, Brad Schreiber, whose comedic work I'd always admired. He's a comic writer. He also wrote a wonderful history of the coroner in Hollywood.
Thomas Noguchi?
Yes, and the others. The Office. He wrote about the coroner's office.
Right.
I forget what the title of that particular book is, but his most recent work, and then he wrote an exhaustive study of Jimi Hendrix, and he's got a book out now which is called something like What's So Funny, which is, because he's taught comedy writing for years.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the techniques of comedy writing, and I've read several of his books about that, and they're fascinating. But the book that's getting most attention right now is called Revolution's End, and it's the story of the Symbionese Liberation Army and Patty Hearst's terrible adventures with them.
Oh, that's a hilarious story.
It's a hilarious story. Non-stop laughing.
No.
Especially if you're into harassment and rape. And
yeah,
stuff like
no
that.
kidding.
So it's a killer. But anyway, what's ironic about that is that the reason why only 5 people died and 11 people were saved, who were wounded, was basically because the Symbionese Liberation Army had phoned bomb threats down to the Chinatown district that evening of the shooting, because there was, I think, something to do with the Democratic Convention coming up, and they were, causing trouble. They were troublemakers. So all of the existing news people and the emergency units and the medics were downtown and actually heard the shooting, and then raced to the scene, and that's why the first people who came into the scene after the shooting had stopped was a cameraman and a lighting man, right? I mean, how surreal is that? And they did a sweep of the scene for the newsreels for the television, and then they left, and in came almost immediately after cops and medics, and they began triaging, and that's what saved so many lives. But that was because of the Symbionese Liberation Army. So in any event, Brad and I have been friends for a while. He's also been a big fan of Proctor and Bergman and has seen a lot of our performances and followed our careers. So he invited me to breakfast up at the deli where a lot of crazy famous people often hang out. Sylvester Stallone was in the booth behind me the other day.
Are we talking about Nate Now's or Arts, or where are we talking?
No, it's called the Beverly Glen Deli.
Yes,
okay?
up on top of the hill.
It's delis are the death of delis is breaking my heart because so much business is done and so much humor goes down in the deli. Well, in any event, we had a breakfast up there, and he basically impelled me. He said, "You have to write your story." And I said, "I know, but I don't have time." He said, "So here's what I'll do." He said, "You tell your story to me. I'll tape record it. I'll do a draft, and then we can punch it up after that." I said, "That sounds like a good idea." So for the next week or so, he would come up to the house here, where I'm calling you from, in Benedict Canyon, and I would sit next to him, and I would tell my stories, and he would ask me questions. And then maybe a month later, he presented me with an electronic draft, and with some of his humor in it, and observations and stuff like that. And I said, "Well, this is a good start, but this is not my voice." So I had to kind of rewrite everything from my perspective to try to put it back into my own vernacular.
And isn't that important? Having it be in your voice is very important in writing.
Absolutely. And the way that I do that is that because I'm an actor, I read things out loud, either out loud in my head, right, or actually reading it out loud so that I can feel the rhythm of it and realize where there's like a hiccup or a burble, where it's not the way I would say it, it's not the way I would present it on stage, it's not the way I would tell somebody that story, and that's where I get my rewriting from. Now, of course, we then, this is another interesting little trick that we did, and I don't know if you've ever done anything like this, but we passed it around to various people that we respect for proofreading,
right,
basically, okay? And we would get, comments. They'd find spelling mistakes or inaccuracies or just outright mistakes in one form or another. And that was very helpful. And that led me to reinvestigate certain aspects of the story where something wasn't clear. They didn't understand that. I have to amplify it, or I would then remember something that I'd forgotten or left out, because it stimulated my memory just to look at it from somebody else's perspective, and then I would rewrite certain segments. Okay, and then of course, when it came to the last few chapters, which dealt with the loss of Peter Bergman, and then the very unexpected loss of my dear partner Phil Austin, I had to add a whole other chapter about Phil Austin's demise. You see, because this process, I was in no hurry to finish it. It would be finished when it was finished. We could not find a publisher who was interested in this, so there was that was the bad side. The good side was there was nobody looking over my shoulder saying, "Hey, come on, finish this! I got to get it out. We got to get the publicity going." And no, it was entirely self-motivated. And so when I felt satisfied, and Brad was satisfied with the feel of the book and the style of the book, style of the storytelling, that's when we collaborated with another dear friend of ours, Andy Thomas, who provided the art design for the book. Because that was the other thing I wanted to do, Steve. I wanted to integrate, just as I did with Planet Proctor, I wanted to integrate pictures into the story, because I have thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures in various formats, right, from all my years with the Firesign Theatre and all of my touring years with Bergman. And the pictures that I was able to put into the book are just like the tip of the iceberg of this pile of memorabilia that I have, that I'm actually going through now, because the Library of Congress is interested in purchasing our archives, and so I'm going to be contributing, certain stuff to that. But in any event, Andy Thomas came in, and he helped Brad and me to design the book, drop in illustrated pictures wherever we could from my collection. And then once we had that aspect done, I got in touch with Bob Grossman, and Andy also turned his attention to the publishing, because he's an excellent producer. He's a jack of all trades, Andy Thomas, and has worked with the Firesign and Proctor and Bergman over the years, and with me and Jamie Alcroft when we did Boomers on a Bench,
right?
Which you can visit online.
Sure.
You go to Boomers on a Bench, you'll see Proctor and Alcroft. And one side story about that: Jamie Alcroft just had a heart and liver transplant.
That's awesome.
He's a 68-year-old comedian.
That's awesome.
And now he's got the beating heart of a 47-year-old donor and the liver of the same donor. So it's a miracle. It's an absolute miracle.
That is a miracle.
All right. So anyway, Andy, we investigated various ways to get the book out, and Andy introduced us to a company called Blurb. You ever hear of Blurb?
I have not.
Well, if you go online and go to blurb.com, you'll see that it's a self-publishing company.
Sure.
And and if you want to publish books of any sort, it shows you how to do it, and it tells you what it'll cost and how you can sell it and how much it'll cost when you sell it and how much profit you'll make and blah 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 blah. And that's a nice alliance. It seems to be working out well. And then, of course, Amazon took the book, so that's where most people go to get it. You go to Amazon.com.
Correct.
But you can also go to Blurb.com. But don't, because I don't make as much money from that.
Well, there was a time, not too long ago, where self-publishing was very difficult, cumbersome, and not necessarily a good thing. And today it's totally changed, where there are many, many people are self-publishing. It's a very simple and easy route to go.
It is.
And compared to where it was even 20 years ago.
Right. And of course, the thing that is that they don't supply is a promotional department, right? So I've invested in promotion from a fellow named Jeff Abraham. If anybody wants to get in touch with me about a print article or any other kind of radio or television exposure, Jeff Abraham at Jonas PR. And the reason that we're working with Jeff is that Firesign Theatre worked with Jeff for decades, maybe 3 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And we love him, and he's a wonderful partner. But if you visit his website on Facebook, you'll see that he's also a font of theater history, of film and television and theater trivia and history. Like another great pal, Eddie Deason.
Yes.
Who, if anybody knows of Eddie Deason, he is also a master of trivia in all kinds of fascinating and bizarre areas, including, of course, show business, because he and the Beatles, and oh my God, wonderful personal stories and things. And I love people like that. See, so working with Jeff has been really exciting, and he has been able to connect me with a lot of nice opportunities. I guess besides your show, the other fun show that I did recently was I appeared on Coast to Coast AM. Now, do you know that show?
I do not.
Now, this is interesting to me. It's like, do you know the Firesign Theatre? The Fireside what?
No, the Firesign Theatre. Right? Well, they're of course my students, my 18, 19, 20-year-old students. I say Firesign Theatre, and they go, "What's that?" But,
yeah, exactly.
But my contemporaries all know. Everybody's a gaga that I've ever met you in the first place, and B, that you're on the show.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, Coast to Coast AM is a paranormal broadcast. It's been on for, 30 years. It was started by a guy named Art Bell. I do know. Now, I'm sorry. That rings a bell with you, right?
Art Bell, I absolutely know, and I just didn't hook up the title of the show.
Nevada.
Yeah, in
like
Pahrump.
That, right? Okay, well, he started it, and it has continued on in various other with various other hosts. George Norrie is the host.
Sure.
That does it regularly now, and I worked with Jimmy Church. Jimmy Church, who does a blog, which is where I first met him, called Fade to Black. and he's a wonderful, energetic, bright broadcaster and interviewer. And so I was able to go down live in the studio with Jimmy and do Coast to Coast for an hour.
Wow.
You know, one of my favorite shows, because I'm so fascinated by the paranormal, as you'll see in the book, because my life has been a living example of strange occurrences and connections with UFOs and bizarre alien adventures and coincidence and life and death situations. Oh my God!
Now you've never been abducted, have you?
No, I've not been. Not to my knowledge. Not to my only personal contact, if you want to call it that, with aliens has been in dream states.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in dream states where I've had rather chilling and very vivid dreams, I guess you could call them, that involved alien communicating with aliens. But most of my adventures in that regard are personal. My strange connection has to do with lights going on and off around me.
Really?
That's been going on for a very long time, and that's something that Sharon told me. Sharon was, oh God, it's all in the book. Sharon was working with Dr. Andrea Poharic, who is a very famous scientist who was focusing his studies on paranormal experiences and contact with alien visitations. Okay, and he had originally gained fame because he was working with the government in experiments of telepathy and using psychedelic drugs to try to use telepathic techniques in spy work and stuff like this. And he became very disillusioned that these wonderful ideas were being turned to the Cold War, and so he dropped out, and they harassed him and blah blah blah. But anyway, he was working with Uri Geller.
Right.
Now, Uri Geller is, of course, a famous charlatan.
Yes.
On one level, right? He's the guy who used to bend spoons.
Yes.
And fix clocks and stuff like that, which all turned out to be basically magic tricks. But on the other hand, he and Poharic would go to the desert in Israel and meet with flying saucer people. These are all the stories that Sharon told me. But she also told me that she was a conduit. The reason she was working with these people up in his research center in Ossining, New York, was that the aliens were channeling through her backwards technology. Is that what they call it? Reverse technology.
They were reverse engineering.
That's it. Reverse engineering. And they were flying her all over the country, groups of scientists and government people, to share her understandings with them. And most of the ones that she shared with me were revelations of nanotechnology. Okay? The aliens had a very advanced form of nanotechnology. They could make drones the size of dust motes.
Wow.
Just floating in the air. Everything. And so all of this is now starting to really come true, especially in terms of medical applications and making motors out of atoms. You've probably read about
Sure.
it. This is the stuff she was talking about, 40 years ago?
That's amazing.
Okay? Anyway, we got a little off track from
process, yes. But it's very interesting. But by the way, and I'm going to get off this in 2 seconds because I have a couple questions, and I know your time is limited again today. So that's, in terms of self-publishing, just so the world is aware, in the publishing world, unless you're a super famous author or a super, like you're the, a famous politician, if you're Stephen King or someone, they will publicize the heck out of your book. But every other author maybe gets 1 week's worth of a push out of a major publishing house, and then the authors have to go out and do their own publishing anyway. So you're not doing anything in terms of you going out and publishing your book that is in any way different from basically if you'd been with a big publisher, except you're getting more profit on the back end.
Yes, that's true. Although I have invested in my book.
I understand.
And of course that's something too that we do. I mean, I know the last time that we actually spent time together, you were promoting your book about writing Broadway shows, writing plays,
beating Hollywood,
writing screenplays.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And that was something that you were doing on your own, right?
Correct. Totally I self-published that book and promote it on a regular basis, and that is becoming more and more the norm.
Right.
You know what the big difference is that you don't have a big distribution arm to put your book into Barnes and Nobles all over the world.
Yeah.
But if you go into Barnes and Noble these days and you look at the various, if you looked in Barnes and Noble at the section of the store that would carry your book, you wouldn't find very many books there anyway. So to do the way you're doing is actually, I think, the smart way to go.
Well, it is what it is, and I have to get in touch with Sharon and find out if she predicts that it'll be successful.
There you go. Okay. All right. So the this is what I need to know. The old line is dying is easy, comedy is hard, and I know it's almost impossible to define. But do you have some notion at this point in your life as to what makes comedy work and why it's so difficult to do well?
My solution to that, besides my own personal writing, which, as I say, I try to make as conversational as possible. If I get a joke that somebody sends me, it's usually awkwardly written. It's funny, okay, because there's a punchline, and there's a comedic element to the story, but it's not written funny. So I will rewrite it funny. And again, it's like I hear it. It's just I hear it in my head, the rhythms that make it funny.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of this comes out of the fact that Firesign Theatre would work in front of a live audience to hone our material. Okay, but basically, what made it funny for us was when we could make one another laugh. Okay, so we were constantly experimenting and honing our comic chops by talking out loud with one another and playing off of one another. So to me, it's very verbal. You see, even if comedy is written, it's got to be something that you hear in your head and has the right comic rhythms to it. I think that's an instinct. I don't think it's something that you can teach the techniques, right, to design a joke, for instance. But that extra element of silliness has to come out of your own spirit and your own soul, and whether you have a natural sense of humor. Okay, that's why a lot of liberals are funnier than conservatives.
Why is that?
Okay, because liberals are more daring. They're more convinced of their of the humanity behind the ideas that they're expressing. Conservatives are ideologues for the most part. They have an agenda that they believe strongly in, and they want to make that agenda clear to whoever it is they're talking to. So conservative jokes tend to be kind of bigoted, if you will. It's like this is our point of view, and you better think this is funny, because if you don't, you must be a liberal.
Yeah,
you understand? It's kind of I'm being a little crazy about this, but that's the way I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
When I get somebody sends me a conservative joke, it's mean, and liberal jokes are not mean. They're fun, They get their point across by making you see a certain reality a certain way, not trying to convince you of another way of looking at the world, but saying, look, this is the way the world is. Take a good look at it, and you'll find it funny.
It's true. You won't find a ton of conservative comedians.
No.
Maybe
really
Dennis Miller's the one that comes to mind.
Yes, and Dennis Miller is pretty good at what he does, actually. I've done his show. I like Dennis. I admire him. He's smart, and he makes his points, and he's not mean-spirited. He really isn't. He sees the human comedy in things.
Yes.
Okay? And Carlin, of course, is the absolute
opposite,
the perfect embodiment of cynicism. He's neither liberal nor conservative. He was neither liberal nor conservative. He was Voltaire. He just revealed the madness of
humanity,
human behavior,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that I kind of fall into that area myself. But now I don't know if I've answered your question, though. I think it can be taught, but I think you have to have the fire in your belly to be able to really express comedy in a written form.
Well,
you have to hear it in your head.
I've long said, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that talent cannot be taught, but you can take the talent you have and perfect it or improve it. And so I think people that are naturally funny, and I do think a certain amount of that is probably genetic, and a certain amount of it is environmental and how you're brought up. And so I ask these questions of those that come on the show who are in the comedic world, in the comedy world, and because I don't know that there is a good answer to it. I don't know there is one answer. I don't think you can teach somebody to be funny. You can teach somebody how to say a joke, but that doesn't make the joke funny. And so it is a conundrum as to why some people have this ability and some don't. You clearly have it in spades, and so that's why I see if I can get it out of you. I think you did answer the question.
I hope so.
I don't. I definitely know so. The thing is that I don't think there's any way for someone who wants to be funny to suddenly be funny.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And that's just the way that works. The last question before I get to the last question. So the penultimate question is, you, in your book, you talk about I'm just so curious. I'm a big fan of Jacques Tati, and you had some kind of a meeting with Jacques Tati.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
All right. Well, my dad, Tom Proctor, from Elkhart, Indiana, he was a lawyer, practicing lawyer, and he got into entrepreneurial business where he would raise money for filmmakers. He raised money for Samuel Bronson to build his studios in Spain, and I was present in Spain, in Madrid, and Toledo, watching the filming of The Pride and the Passion, which starred Frank Sinatra, Sophia Loren, whom I later met again under other bizarre circumstances, and Cary Grant, I think it was. Oh, good Lord. I used to watch them all staggering up the stairs of the Castellana Hilton after a hard day's shooting in that hot sun. Anyway, so my dad was raising money for movies, and one of the people that he met during the course of this business he was doing was Jacques Tati, the famous French filmmaker whose movie Mr. Hulot's Holiday was a real groundbreaking comic film. He, like Chaplin, has the ability to create comedy with mime, with physical, his body and his takes, and the design of his jokes, the design of
genius, a visual genius.
A visual genius. And so I met him. My dad, bless his heart, my dad invited me to come to a meeting in Jacques Tati's hotel room. And there was, Jacques Tati was a big man. He's like 6'7" or something.
Wow.
Tall, lanky body. You should Google Jacques Tati. You should Google Mr. Hulot's Holiday and any of his other movies.
Playtime.
Mon Oncle, right? Yeah, Playtime, right? Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant stuff. And anyway, there he is, this long man lying on a bed in his hotel room. I think he was in town to promote one of his films too. In fact, probably the Playtime movie, and I got into a conversation with him. I was maybe 13 years old, 14 maybe, and he told me this. He said, Philippe, if you must be a director of your movie. He said, if you are not a director, you say, it's funny with the mustache. And the director says, no, it's not funny with the mustache. You take off the mustache. And you say, but no, it's funny with the mustache. He said, no, you take off the mustache and we shoot the scene. So you take off the mustache, it's not funny. Okay? And that was what he told me. Be your own director. You have to direct your own comedy, right? You have to be responsible for your own comedy. You have to be in control of your own comedy.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I joined the Firesign Theatre, because I was in control of the comedy, as much as you can be with three other crazy guys.
Well, sure.
But I was in control of my contribution to the comedy, and I still am. That's what I try to look for. Even when I work on stage in a comedy, I am aware, or I'm doing a recreation of an old radio show at a radio convention, right? Or I'm doing an original radio piece, because I love to do live audio pieces in front of live audiences. They're much more fun than dead audiences, believe me. But the fact is that even if I'm working with a director whom I respect, I am not afraid to make suggestions, and even if in terms of like other actors I'm working with, I'll talk to the director and I'll say, what if we did this with this particular bit? And he said, try it, so that it's a collaborative, cooperative adventure that allows everybody to participate to the greatest extent of their ability, and to interact as much as possible. That's my philosophy.
Well, going back to Jacques Tati for 2 seconds, there's a reason why Mel Brooks and Harold Ramis and Woody Allen and folks like that, wound up directing their own work, because it was being butchered by others.
That's true. That's true. And again, it's because in spite of the barriers that occur when you take on that responsibility, because you become a producer as well as a director when you're doing that stuff, and you have to get people to accept your vision of things and to go. My favorite Mel Brooks story, which I think is in the book, is I got to work with him overdubbing a French film, another French story actually. There was a French film called The Visitors, Les Visiteurs, that was an enormous hit for Gaumont distribution, and it was a story of a medieval knight and his serf who have to come to the present modern day France in order to right a wrong that happened to their family. Okay, and it's a very, very funny film, and of course the idea was we'll dub it into English because it'll then reach even a wider audience. So Mel Brooks was hired, and a writer was hired to do the translation, and Mel thought, now here we go, Mel thought it would be funnier if we all spoke with French accents, okay? So we are overdubbing the French film with French accents, because it's funny, of course. It's funny to hear a French accent, It's not my dog, The Clouseau movies are a perfect example of that. So we work for weeks and weeks and weeks to make these funny French overdubbing of the film. The problem was that the French that they were speaking was a very fast Parisian French. So when you're talking like this with a French accent, and you're trying to make your mouth work the way on the screen when they showed the finished product to a test audience in Encino, they thought we were speaking French. They couldn't understand it. And Mel said he would run up to the projection booth and say, "Turn it up, and make it louder." And nothing worked. And that film was never released.
Oh.
And every time whenever I've run into Mel, it's a little joke between us, because the entire cast was invited to a cast screening of the movie, but it never happened. They never did any follow-up. They never told us where it was going to be. They never told us, where the party was or anything, because they did these test screenings and they found it didn't work, and it was scrapped. And I think it's Mel's only, at least this is what he told me, it's his only failure.
Wow.
He considers it his only failure.
That's some. I don't know if that's a good mark to have for you or not.
Well, it's a shame, because it really was, for somebody with tuned ears like I have, it really was funny. I mean, he was absolutely right. It was very funny to have us speaking with French accents in a French movie. It just worked. But the untuned ears of the great unwashed masses, they couldn't hear it.
Oh, wow.
And that's the way it is.
So I've had you longer than I think I had you for, but and I'm just absolutely grateful for it. I'm just curious, before you go, over the years as a writer, has anyone ever said anything to you that's a piece of advice about writing in specific? Because I know last time we talked about diversification, but in terms of being a writer, is there any piece of advice you could lend us?
Yeah, I think there's the thing that popped into my head when you asked that question was something that Bergman used to do. When we were writing together as Proctor and Bergman, which we did for many, many years, we would write at this point we were working on computers. We would write the material down without any care about spelling or grammar, or we put it down in a stream of consciousness. And I do this too. When I'm working on a project, I let my back brain work on it. For instance, if I'm doing something, I'm writing something that requires a research, I will do my research and maybe take notes and things like that. But for the most part, I'll let that research go into my brain, into my subconscious, and then I'll sleep on it, or I'll just live life with it in there and let it kind of percolate until all of a sudden my muse says, "Okay, I'm ready," and will dictate to me the material that I need to write.
Wow.
And that can happen in the middle of the night sometimes.
Do you get up?
So my advice is always have a pencil or a pen and paper nearby, or some kind of device, or even a recording device sometimes, so that you can capture the material when your mind is ready to dictate it to you.
Right.
Okay? Now, and that's really been a technique that in Firesign years and with Proctor and Bergman always worked for me. And it sometimes had to be just jotting down a couple of funny lines that would come to me in the middle of the night. And on the basis of those lines, I could construct a whole comic sketch, because the essence of the funny, the essence of the joke, or the story was contained in a few funny catchphrases.
Interesting.
And I have books that are filled with things like that, and napkins and all that stuff from the years that I was really actively writing comedy.
Well, I hope someday that all winds up in the Library of Congress too.
Yeah, well, some of it will. If I can find it, I'll throw it into a box and ship it off to Washington AC/DC.
Well, Phil, you are a gem to come on the show the second time, and
well,
this
thank you. It's a great pleasure. Anytime at all. I love talking about the art, and I like to, as I do in the book, I like to encourage people to pursue, as you said, to pursue their talents and what's the word? To inflate your talent. Oh, that's not the word. Anyway, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
To improve
right?
it, yeah, to improve yourself.
Improve it. There, simple word. Right. I didn't need a thesaurus for that.
No. This has just been a terrific treat to have you the second time, and I'm so grateful to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm off today. I'll be doing another interview live in studio at KPFK, listener-supported radio here in Southern California, in Los Angeles. And that's where the Firesign Theatre began. That's where it all started, on KPFK.
Wow.
So that's going to be a fun little interview, for sure.
That will be. But that'll be live. That won't be something that'll be up on the net, will it?
Oh, yeah, everything gets up on the net eventually. And if you go to my site on Facebook, you'll see links to these various interviews, including this one, I hope.
Absolutely. Now yours, we're recording it on a certain day, and it will be several weeks before it gets released. And as soon as that happens, then yes, you'll have a link, and it'll be linked from me to you, you to me.
Well, that's fine. I think that's how Lincoln began, didn't he? He'd make a speech, and then people would repeat it to other people weeks later, months later. Everything was slower in those days.
It was.
It got out there.
It was. So anyway, have a wonderful day, and at some point, when you write your next book, you'll be on for sure. But maybe before that.
Oh, sure. Anytime you want to talk about anything like this, I'm absolutely open to it. And I do hope that you get out here again, and that we get a chance to go visit Delhi and have some laughs.
That will do. Thank you so much.
Steve. A pleasure.
Take care.
Bye for now.
Bye. Today's StoryBeat tip. When writing your screenplay, don't direct the actors, directors, cinematographer, technicians, or anyone else. Simply write visually and let the other artists figure it out. So if you want to write something like, Dan steps up to the door, turns to look back at the house, looks at the door, reaches for the door handle, grabs the knob, and turns it. As the door opens, the wind rushes in, cooling Dan, who thinks about how nice the day will be. The camera rises to take in the drab urban surroundings. Don't do that. Rewrite it to be something more like, Dan hurries to the door, takes one last look around, steps out of the house into exterior inner city street, day. Drab industrial buildings line a street full of burned-out cars. That makes for better writing. Allow the director, cinematographer, actors, designers, and editors to do their jobs. There's no need to write camera rises, camera tracks, tracking, two-shot, medium shot, long shot, or any other kind of camera movement, angle, or shot. Simply write what the audience sees and hears without any technical embellishment. In short, tell your story. Then let the technicians and the other artists do what they do best, which is to translate your script into a great motion picture. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.